We've just finished building this Kenyan Top-Bar Beehive from scratch. That's right, we even milled all our own timber to do it. I'm going to show you all of that, including how you can build one of these beehives for yourself and get into what I believe is one of the most easiest methods of beekeeping there is. Not only that, I'm going to talk about why I love this style of beekeeping, not just because it's great for the bees, but because of the surprising mental health benefits that come as a result of caring for bees this way. So stick around and let's go meet the bees. Well, if you've been following along on our journey for a while now, you'll know we've been caring for this little colony of bees pretty much since we got here. And if you want to check out how we got started with them, you could check out this little short clip here. But soon after we got started with them, we quickly needed to upgrade them to a larger home. And even though we were heading into the colder part of the year, where typically the colony size would shrink down and I wouldn't need to worry about space so much, they were doing so well out here that I wanted to ensure they didn't run out of space, because one of the dangers of them running out of space is that they can decide that half of them need to go and find a new home. That's called swarming. And I didn't want to lose half the bees in the most vulnerable time of the year when it's cold and resources are low. So we built them this temporary little home. It's basically a double-sized swarm catcher. And if you want to know more about how we built that and why we made it the shape and size we did, you could check out this video. Now, you might be looking at the size of this and the shape of this going, that doesn't look like any kind of beehive that I've ever seen before. And that's because I've been keeping bees for a number of years now, and my favorite method of looking after bees is using a top-bar beehive, or sometimes called a Kenyan hive, or Kenyan top-bar beehive. And the Kenyan hive has a number of features that I'm going to talk about later on in this video, but one of the main features is that it tries to mimic the natural shape of honeycomb that bees like to make. So you get this kind of almost a U shape here. Now, we're going to be building a full-size hive today. We didn't get around to doing that before winter because we've been working on getting our sawmill set up and fine-tuned. We've done a little bit of sawmilling and a few different little projects, but this was going to be our biggest project to date, and we needed to make some really large boards for this project. Well, the sawmill is dialed in, so it's time to hit the sawmill, make some timber for this project, and I'm going to show you exactly how we build a Kenyan top-bar beehive. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually just transcribing the plans onto an offcut of timber because the sun was just too glary on my iPad. So I've got these plans as a document, and I had intended to read them off my iPad, but that wasn't going to work. So there are some pretty specific angles and measurements that you need to get right when making one of these Kenyan hives. I've made this document available as a download, so if you want to follow my build exactly, have a look in the description down below. You're going to find a link where you can download the plans for this build. Now, we cut all of these boards to 1 inch or 25mm thick, and so they're going to be awesome, not just for their insulation factor, because like I said, this is Australian hardwood. I'm not going to have to worry about insulation for our hot summer days or even our cold winters that we do get out here. I pretty much just cut my boards to size as I went, but if you wanted to make a complete cut list, that's in the document that you can download down below. Essentially, you're going to need 5 boards of 1.2 meters long, or 1200 by 250 millimeters wide. Now, you're going to cut some of those a little bit narrower than 250 millimeters, and you'll see those cuts as we go through the build, but those are the main board sizes you're going to need to start with. Now, if I had a table saw, which is on the wish list, then a lot of these cuts would be a whole lot easier. Obviously, then I'd be working to a fence and a lot of my cuts would be easier to make. But make sure you've got a good set of tools. If you're doing this build like I am and you're kind of using a handsaw, then have a good set of measuring tools where you're going to get some square edges. It's going to matter in the end, trust me. So as you can see, the cutting's pretty slow going. I don't want to put too much pressure on my saw here, but that hardwood is dense as. The first two boards I'm making are my side boards. They're basically going to form the front and the back of the hive, and these ones are 1200 long by 600 wide. I'm going to cut what's called the follower boards here. Now these ones are really important that you get right, so check the instructions for how to do these cuts and specifically how to get these angles right. So in a Kenyan hive, the follower board is basically what gives you the flexibility to adjust the size of the hive to the colony that you've got at the moment. And you'll see when we move our bees into this hive later on, I'm actually only using about a quarter or maybe a third of the entire hive space, but the follower boards allow you to shrink up that space or expand it as you need to. The follower boards are also going to be how we set the overall outside dimensions of the hive and get those V angles on the front and back boards correct. And you'll see how we do that in just a minute. Again, just skinning the surfaces of these follower boards to make sure that the surfaces that are going to be facing internally in towards the bees are going to be nice and smooth, and they're less likely to attach comb to them, or even if they do, it's nice and easy to detach it from them. Okay, the next two pieces I want to cut are my end boards. These are 600 by 250, and I'm going to attach the follower boards to them temporarily, and that's going to help me basically build my box. So for this next bit, what you want to do is measure down 20 millimeters, and again, this is on the plans, and I'm going to mount my follower boards centrally on here. So I'm finding a center line on this end board. I'm also marking a center line on my follower board, and then I sit it 20 mil down from the top of the end board, and then that's going to give me my guide to be able to mount my front and back, the big long side boards, onto those end boards. So here we need to match the angle of the follower boards, and you'll see why when we drop this in place. It needs to sit neatly at the same angle. We can't have 90-degree sides on this, or otherwise we would end up with some funky gaps inside the hive that the bees are maybe going to be tempted to propolize and fill with propolis, but probably not, and you're going to end up with them filling up with junk. They're going to be great little hiding spots for hive beetle and other sorts of nasties. So in order to make a nice clean fit here, you want to get these angles right. Again, have a look at the plans. It's going to tell you exactly how to cut these sides to angle. Okay, now we get to assembly. Now this bit can be a little bit tricky. I'm just doing it up here on the bench. It's definitely easier to do up here. You might be tempted to stand it up and do it on the ground, but I found that it's going to be too tall to do that. It does help if you've got a helper, someone who can hold things in place, but essentially you're just going to need to make a couple of little chocks to get everything to sit nicely. So in this shot, I do have my bottom board sitting there, and I was kind of using it in part to help me with chocking the pieces into place. But there's going to come a point here where I need to get it out of the way, because essentially it gets dropped in from the top once my four main sides, the ends, the front and the back, are completed. So I'm going to need to get that bottom board out of the way. So now that we've got those four pieces attached and all matching up to the follower boards, I can now remove them. They were basically just screwed on there temporarily as a guide. I can take those screws out of there completely, and I'm going to be dropping my bottom board in place now. You're not going to be able to drop that bottom board in place when the follower boards are in the way. I'm pretty happy with that. Nice snug fit. Those angles matched up perfectly, and I'm going to check it with my follower board. Yeah, look, there's a tiny bit of movement, a little bit of gap in there, but to be honest, that follower board doesn't get fixed in place from here on out, and so a little bit of movement and play is not going to be a huge issue there. I'm really happy with how this is coming together. All right, well, those 5 pieces essentially make our box. We've got the angles of the front and the back sitting really nicely. That's going to be perfect for bees making comb in the shape they want to make. So we're going to move this box out of the way. We're going to make up some legs, and that's it. 5 sides and 4 legs, and what you've got is a Kenyan Top-Bar hive, but it's those angles that are going to be the most important, so follow along on those instructions. The video picks up again the next day because I started running out of light here. What I did do just after this was knock together a real quick simple lid, and you'll see that in this video coming up. Well, here we are, day 2, and we're pretty much ready to get this thing installed. I made a few little tweaks and adjustments. At the end of the day, it was getting a bit too dark to film. Essentially, I changed the legs because when I stood it up, I realized that the height wasn't quite right. And one of the advantages of top-bar beekeeping is the ergonomics of it. So you're only ever lifting one frame of honey at a time, not a whole big box, and you don't have to bend over to do it. So you really want to set the height at about desk height. Now, I'm a little bit taller, and so I could probably afford to go even taller, but I've kind of set this at an average height, so it's about 800 or 2.5 feet off the ground, and that's a really good kind of ergonomic working height. I've made a lid up for it. It's just a temporary version, a bit of color bond, and that's going to sit over the top. Its only purpose is to stop rain from getting down inside the hive, and that's why I don't do like a flat top on it, because it's quite an exposed area, and the way the top bars sit, water could get down in amongst the hive. I'll pretty it up at some stage later on, and we'll make it hinge and all of that, but for now it's just enough to keep our summer rains off of it. I've also put some holes in the entrance, and we're going to orient that entrance and get this hive positioned in place. Now this is going to be an important next step. That's where they've been camped out for the last few weeks. In fact, they started about 20 meters in that direction, and if you know anything about beekeeping, there's a rule when it comes to moving bees. It's called the 3 foot 3 mile rule. Nice and easy to remember, but I've got to do a little bit of translation, so if you're here and you use metric units, then it's the 1 meter 5 kilometer rule. Okay, I'll concede sometimes your measuring system is helpful. 3 foot 3 mile rule essentially says that the bees, when they get home at the end of the day, if they can't find the entrance to their hive, they'll do a little kind of search grid pattern and look for that entrance within a space of about 3 feet or 1 meter. If they don't find it, that can be actually quite dangerous for them, because oftentimes they'll just camp out down on the ground overnight, and obviously that's no good for them, and maybe even the next day they don't even find their home. So if we're moving a hive, we can only move it 3 foot or 1 meter at a time. So in order to get them positioned here, I had to move them over the space of about 20 days from where they were over to here, because that location over there is where we were building our outdoor bathroom. So it took me 20 days to get them to move here. There's another way around that, and that is I could have packed them all up overnight, moved them more than 5 kilometers or 3 miles away. The next morning when they would get up and head out to work, they would recognize straight away that they were in an entirely new area, and they would do a little orientation flight to help them learn the new entrance to their home. But if they're too close to where their old home was, then they might follow their old flight path back home and still not find their hive. So that's why 3 miles or 5 kilometers is another way that you can do that. And so essentially, one way I could move them 20 meters is if I knew somebody that was 5 kilometers away, I could pack them up overnight, take them to that property, let them hang out there for a couple of days, and then bring them back here and move them 20 meters away from where they started. That would be a little kind of a cheat code way of getting around it. But I had the time, so I've moved them from over there to there. And whilst I was doing that, I noticed that their flight path, which is kind of the direction they fly in once they leave the hive, was not east. And typically I've found that bees kind of fly east. It's a good way to orient the entrance to the hive, because that's where the sun comes up. And so that's the first part of the hive that warms up and gets light. The bees will fly out and kind of follow the path of the sun, and then they'll go exploring from then. But these girls are kind of flying north. And so I've got their entrance oriented a little bit northeast, and some of them are even flying out a little bit northwest. So we're going to face the entrance of this hive north, and that's obviously where they're finding a whole lot of resources. So in order to help them find this new entrance, that's what we're going to do. So next step, get this positioned, and then we're going to suit up and get some bees moved. Well, I couldn't be happier with how that move went, and they were just so gentle and calm throughout the whole process. I really didn't need the suit, and as you can see, I've already half taken it off. This method of beekeeping is such a gentle, non-invasive, bee-centric style of beekeeping, and it's one of the things that attracted me to it in the first place. Not only is it, like I already said, it's kind of ergonomic, it's easy on your back, you're not lifting whole boxes of honey at a time, but because you're only ever lifting one frame of bees at a time, you've got to take your time with it. And so this whole practice of caring for bees and taking care of bees is kind of amplified in the sense of the meditative mindfulness aspects of it. And I guess that was probably one of the most unexpected outcomes of beekeeping that I didn't realize was going to be the case, but it's one of the things I've fallen in love with the most, is that you have to take your time with it. It's quite an observational activity as well, so it's not like keeping cows where you go out into the paddock and, you know, count the cows, yep, they're all there, that's that activity done. No, to actually find the queen and check for parasites and all of those things that you have to do in beekeeping, you've got to take your time with it. And so I really enjoy this mindfulness, this meditative aspect of looking after the bees. And this style of beekeeping particularly lends itself to those aspects because you've got to take your time with it. It's really gentle, like I've said, but it's also really natural as well. We've already talked about how the shape of the hive mimics the style of honeycomb that they like to make. But this whole setup is like a old, fallen, rotted out log. It's exactly the kind of thing that the bees would be looking for in nature. So it's such a low stress way of keeping bees that you will find that the bees respond in kind. And so I'm literally able to take out, look here, I'll show you. I can take out a whole frame of bees. I don't have a suit on. If they were to walk on my hands, I'm not worried about this in the slightest. They're not going to sting me. They don't see me as a threat. I haven't done anything super invasive. I'm not jostling them around. You know, I haven't disturbed their entire home one box at a time. I'm literally lifting out one frame at a time. Well, we're going to leave them there to do their thing. As you can see behind me, the original box that they were in is a literal hive of activity. So all of those workers that are coming in, they're looking for where they're supposed to deposit their goodies that they've just harvested, and they can't find their home. But they're going to sniff out the queen. She's literally putting out a chemical or a pheromone to help them locate her, and they'll find their home nice and easily. I could kind of shake them in there or dump them in there, but again, this natural style of beekeeping lends itself to just being really slow and mindful about how you do everything in beekeeping. So we're going to let them take the rest of the day to find their home. I'm sure that by the time we come out here at the end of the afternoon, that old hive will be empty and the bees will be happy in their new home.